Hello, this is Dread from Epic Builds. And in today's video topic, I actually have a double feature for you this time with Poison slash Bleed Flurry Blade Dancer. Before I get into the video, I would heavily suggest liking and commenting on the video if you want to see more, as that's the best way to support the channel currently and the best way to tell YouTube I am doing a good job. And with that being said, with a double feature, that means we need double the amount of heads. So I actually have Arborus here. Arborus, go right ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, this is Arbrous.
So Arborus, how long have you been playing the game?
Way too long. I think coming up on 4 years.
God, you've been playing almost as long as I have. But yeah, Arborus and I started talking to him. I'm probably about like half a year ago. Him and we just talk about builds and stuff now. I believe we did like the Poison Witch build guide, and after that, we've done a few collaborations since then, and gotten EHG to nerf certain things. One thing I like about Arborist is he does all the stuff I can't do, especially right now because I can't do bleed right now because my PC lags. Yeah, so what do you think the big differences between the poison and the bleed version of this build?
The poison version, I think, is a lot more accessible. There are fewer uniques to make it feel good. The damage ceiling is a lot higher if you have really good gear and idols. The bleed version, however, if you get those extra uniques, has a lot more consistent defenses that really help with pushing the higher corruption levels and maybe arena, though I personally don't tend to venture into arena very often.
Okay, and what kind of uniques are the cornerstones of the bleed version?
The bleed version makes use of the Corsair's unique set hood that has bleed duration and bleed effect and increased block effectiveness on it to really get every kind of stat that you could want on your helmet slot. And then makes use of the extremely powerful defensive uniques that are Ravenous Void and Bastion of Honor to make it to where you are effectively unkillable. You know, you have almost every possible defense layered on a single character, as most other characters can't get the capped glancing blow, the capped block, good amount of dodge, good amount of armor, and leech and life on kill. You have almost everything covered.
Also, if you get like some life on hit, isn't it like nuts?
Yeah, life on hit, you hit extremely fast with flurry. So having life on hit on your weapon means that your life just ping pongs up and down as you take damage, immediately going back to full.
So I was kind of surprised by this when I first saw the build when you showed it to me the first time. I noticed you're, of course, using a shield. Is Bastion of Honor that strong that it's actually better to not dual wield on the dual wield class?
Defensively, I think it's no contest. Bastion of Honor is absolutely insane. It's There's just nothing comparable, I think, to getting that 100% block chance for only a single item slot worth of investment. Damage wise, dual wielding is a massive step up, and luckily we can make use of both by swapping out weapons to a dual wield setup whenever we need to boost the damage, 3.5, 4 times as high as the Bastion setup, while using the shield is a lot more consistently defensive for monolith echoes where there's a huge swarm of enemies hitting you. If you're able to manually avoid the boss abilities, you don't really need that extra layer, and you can just go full glass cannon and kill the bosses in a matter of seconds, really.
Yeah, and from what you're saying, it just lets you kind of AFK monoliths a little bit easier, by being so
Exactly.
tanky.
Yeah, it really removes almost any risk of dying. You can stand in a lot of things. Um, Yeah, it makes it to where anything that would normally be threatening is toned down a significant degree because you're blocking almost half of all the damage coming in.
So for corruption, in terms of corruption, I know you got this like 300 plus corruption. How far do you think it's going to push overall?
Yeah, I've played this build to about, I think, 330 is about where I've stopped at the moment. I think damage wise, the build could easily do, the 1,000 corruption content that Poison Lich was able to do in the last patch. The boss damage is extremely comparable to what was possible with that build. Clear wise, this one is definitely a bit slower. You don't have the kind of overwhelming clearing power of something like Spirit Plague. Um, but defensively, this build has a lot more than what Poison Lich does, so it should be a lot more comfortable, a lot less nerve wracking at times to get to those really high corruptions. I would say, 550, 600 corruption should be extremely doable, and higher than that, I would not be surprised at all.
So I actually have a question. So I've actually seen a lot of people, including myself sometimes, that will spec into the shockwave stuff for just extra clear. What are your thoughts on that? Shockwave. Have you tried it or
The Shockwave and Flurry, right?
yeah, the little physical explosion. Mainly what people do is they use it to like overlap on clear to like make clear a little bit faster.
Uh, I haven't tried it at all, honestly. The clear itself is, I would say, fine. A lot of times you can get away with kind of tapping flurry on a pack and then having it die to damage over time. You just don't really have the kind of full screen, almost like automatic clearing that you would get from something like Spirit Plague or Devouring Orb.
Yeah. And another question as well, since I know at this point pretty much EHG watches my videos at this point because they like to nerf things, especially your build specifically. In your opinion, what would be the fairest way to nerf this build?
I mean, I think the way to nerf it that would hit the least other kind of flurry builds would just be to increase the kind of ailment effectiveness penalty that flurry already has. Currently has a 40% reduced chance to apply ailments. Bumping that up to, you know, 50 or so, 60 maybe, could shave off some of that top end damage you get from having so many concurrent poison stacks. But it wouldn't affect, like the crit flurry builds and, would probably affect bleed a bit less, but I think bleed is a lot less egregious than poison mechanically. So that would definitely be my angle.
All right, and with all that being said, in the end, what was your favorite, the bleed or the poison?
I am a huge sucker for ramping damage and really, really big dot ticks. So poison, I think, is the clear winner for me. But I do think that bleed, if you have the items and the gear for it, is overall a more powerful build to push those really, really high corruptions.
Yeah, it's like a lot more balanced setup.
Yeah, it's a lot more well-rounded. Um, the poison version will at times maybe feel a bit sketchy because you don't have the super quick, immediately back to full HP that you get from killing things with Valdir's Chalice on, like Bleed does. Not that the build has bad sustain, but uh, there is definitely a difference between healing 1500 some health when an enemy dies versus not having that.
Yeah, Valdir's has been pretty busted. I ran that on the bleed HOA build and it was a breeze. Yeah, with that being said, I think that's pretty much it for the intro here. I know it's a very long intro, but we had to talk about both skills, and this is also kind of like the first time I've had Arborus on, so I did want to have more of a conversation with him. With that being said, I will also have timestamps in the description so you guys can like skip around and stuff like that. With that being said, let's get into the video, shall we? All right, here we are in planner with the build here, as I don't actually have the build. This is Arbrous build. But so before we get into it, I'm going to explain. So this is a bunch of different planners because he was nice enough to go through all the different variants you could actually play. You could play the weapon swap Poison Flurry, meaning that you swap between Ravenous Void Basing Honor for a Wing Guards and an offhand dagger to deal insane amounts of single target on Oribus, as you don't really need to be tanky versus Oribus since you instantly kill him. Or as I'm going to showcase here, we're going to do dagger and shield with no swap. Your damage is going to be a little bit less than in the footage, but you won't have to just weapon swap. And that's going to be the same for the bleed version. I am going to be referring to the bleed version sometimes when I talk about differences, but for the main bulk of the video, I will be talking about the poison version and just pointing out where the bleed version is different. But yeah, let's get into the skills, shall we? So for Flurry, this is your stereotypical ailment Flurry setup. So we are going Channeled Flurry. We take 3 points travel into Alacrity and then 1 point into Boundless Blows. This makes it so your Flurry channels. Now, why is that different than regular Flurry? Well, if you play regular Flurry, there is a moment between your third strike and your next first strike, and it reduces your damage significantly because there's an animation lock. And Channeled Flurry pretty much removes the animation lock, increasing your damage while also increasing the clear and how good it feels. Then, of course, 2 points travel to Relentless, just a bunch more attack speed. 1 point to Adrenaline Rush. If you have enough attack speed, this just gives you pretty much 20% more damage and 20% increased attack speed, which is really good. 2 points travel into Vile Tactics. This is good, but not really good. It's kind of okay. 3 points into Lethal Vector, damaging ailments inflicted by Flurry deal more damage. So this is 30% more damage right off the bat, which is multiplicative with everything else, which is really strong. 3 points into Compounding Toxin, poison stacks inflicted by Flurry deal 30% more damage as well, which is really, really strong. When we take 2 points travel into Deep Strikes, although this does apply to the poison/bleeds, 1 point into Precision Travel, 1 point into Crescendo Travel. The more damage, it gives you a little bit more damage at the high end, but it doesn't really matter. Then 1 point into Shockwave so that you can deal AoE damage. It turns it kind of into a Lacerate version, right? Which is really good for you. Now, the only difference between the bleed and the poison version, as you can tell here, we'll bring it up, is we grab Reopened Wounds instead of Compounding Toxin. Obviously, that's the only difference in Flurry itself. Then, of course, for Shurikens, this is the same on both builds, I believe, pretty much, because you get the Fizz/Poison Shred, which is really strong because that Poison Shred does stack on top of Poison's innate Shred, and pretty much this is your stereotypical setup with Shift to proc for just some extra armor thanks to Bladed Armor, and you get the 100% Pierce chance, of course, so that you never lose your blades. And it just gives you a little bit extra DR on top of everything else. Gives you some extra poison stacks/bleed stacks. Also just gives you a little bit of shred. This is a lot more important on the Fizz version, as having that Fizz shred is really strong in comparison to having, poison shred. Now, for the poison version here, we're talking about Shift. This is your stereotypical Shift tree. Nothing's changed about it. It's the same thing like every other Shift tree. Like I said, proccing Shurikens, getting the invulnerability, getting a bunch of dodge when you shift, and then, of course, getting movement speed. There's not really much else. It's just mainly for maneuverability through monoliths. Then one difference between the bleed and the poison version is he is using Lethal Mirage for the bleed version, which I'll explain why in a second. And then poison, he's using Acid Flask. So Acid Flask, what he does is he throws it on the ground when he's trying to kill Arborus, because 2 points travel into Caustic Concoction, 4 points into Contamination. This, like I said, this poison resistance shred stacks on top of poison shred. It's innate with poison. 1 point into Poison Pools, just gives you a poison pool, just gives you more poisons. Then 5 points into hydrochloric acid. It just gives you a bunch of global poison chance, which is insane because you're attacking so fast. 3 points into lingering toxicity, so it lasts longer. Then, of course, 4 points into amatoxic pools, so it makes them take 10% increased damage over time. Now, thankfully, thanks to the duration / the cooldown, I believe that this does stack. I'm not entirely sure if it does or not, but I believe it does. Don't quote me if I'm wrong. I think it does. It's why you want to spam it on single target. Then 1 point travel into the slow. It doesn't really matter what else you grab. Yeah, that's pretty much it for Acid Flask. Now for the bleed version, instead of Acid Flask, you run Lethal Mirage. Why is that? Well, He is running a little bit of crit vulnerability on the bleed version. Why is that? So every crit vulnerability stacks makes it easier to crit on a single target on a target. And why he's doing that is because of rending darkness. Now, Lethal Mirage can now also hit allies, granting the Mirage form buff for 4 seconds, granting bleed chance and additional dodge rating. This can also, I think, apply to you thanks to Phantasmal Presence. When Lethal Mirage ends, you gain Mirage form 1 second per critical strike landed. This can last 6 seconds. This is insanely strong for single target as it gives you a butt ton of bleed chance, right? And you just get an insane amount of it and go up to 6 seconds, which is really strong. And that's pretty much why you're running Lethal Mirage. Also, the iframe while doing monoliths is really fun. It gives you a lot of burst potential as well. Just all in all, it's a really good skill for the bleed version. And we're going back to the poison version here. Now, the puncture trees are the exact same. Even though he's not running bleed on the poison version, the amount of bleed chance that puncture gives you is enough to give you a lot of damage, so he still uses it even on the poison version. And of course, it gives you frenzy, which is really strong. And of course, infectious toxins as well, so you have more uptime on it. And that's pretty much it for puncture here. I believe puncture is the same exact setup here, except he's turning all of your poison chance from here into bleed chance, which is this pretty much 60% here. And that's pretty much it for the skills for both builds. Now for the passives, 8 points into Swift Assassin for the attack speed, 8 points into Steady Hand for the HP because you want as much HP as possible, 1 point travel into Guile, 5 points into Evasion for the DR because you really like DR with this build, 5 points into Agility, just gives you that haste on hit chance. He has a lot of movement speed as well, so you just get a bunch of increased damage. 5 points into Dodge and Parry for the Glancing Blow chance, 3 points into Poison Tipped. This isn't really that good, so this is where you put your last 3 points is into Poison Tipped. And of course, 8 points into Thief Guard for the HP, and since you have capped Glancing Blow most of the time with this build, having a bunch of health gained on Glancing Blow, this is a lot stronger on the Bleed version. I believe the Bleed version has the same exact tree here, except he's not grabbing it until Poison Tipped, obviously. But yeah, the Bleed version is a lot stronger because you do get like closer to capped Glancing Blow, I believe. So both these nodes are insanely strong for this build. Now for the Blade Dancer tree, 8 points into Cloak of Shadows for the Glancing Blow, 8 points into Shroud of Dust for the HP, 5 points into Veil of Night for the attack speed. The Dust Shroud's chance sadly does not work well because he's using Channeled Flurry, so you can kind of just ignore that one. 10 points into Blood Serpent's Blade. This is the same for both builds because it gives you bleed or poison, depending if you're wearing a sword or a dagger. So it's used on both. And I believe the trees are the same exact same, except for the crit vulnerability here. You hit so many times that this is enough to keep your Lethal Mirage buff up, which is really strong. But yeah, there's not really many differences in the passive trees because of the way this works. 8 points into Scarlet Stream for bleed chance. Like I said, bleed is halfway decent on this version. On the poison version, it just gives you extra damage. And there's another reason, which I'll explain later, why he wants bleed. Of course, same thing with Crimson Shroud. 6 points into Asuvant's Pact for the increased damage and the flat dodge. 5 points into Perfection because he's going to reach max Perfection stacks instantly with this build. 5 points into Confidence gives you a bunch of flat armor. Since he hits so much, he's going to be at max Perfection stacks always. And of course, 1 point into Exuberance, so he gets 2, so it just keeps it up more often. 1 point into Argent Veil makes it so when you take a bunch of damage, you get a Silver Shroud, which will make it so you can automatically dodge the next attack. Really strong against bosses like Arborus. When he hits you really hard, he's not going to be able to hit you again for a while. And of course, 8 points into Death Door. This is just pretty much an extra amount of endurance. It's insanely strong, and I believe it's all the same exact, except instead of the poison tips, he's going into the critical vulnerability for the bleed version. And that's pretty much it for the passives. Now for the idols are a little bit different here. So for the bleed version, he's running damage over time while wielding a sword, damage over time while wielding a sword, and of course bleed chance per equipped sword, which is 1 right now. it's like just as much bleed chance. It's kind of obvious, right? Then of course, poison chance per dagger, dagger stuff, same thing. It's like it's literally the same thing, right? With the idols, it's just poison versus bleed, right? Then for this version, he's running a helmet with poison chance per dagger, increased poison duration, which is an insanely strong stat for this kind of build because the longer they last, the more shred they do, and the more shred they do, the more damage your other poisons do. Just go for as much HP as possible. He does have the endurance blessing, so he doesn't have to run endurance on the helm. As you can tell here, he is endurance capped. This is his gear in game, by the way, not just a finished planner. Bleeding Heart, of course, for the leech. Leech is so insanely strong. You want it on any ailment build. So just having this is insanely strong for him. The chest, of course, increased damage while wielding a dagger and as much HP as humanly possible. The shield, of course, he's running Bastion of Honor for both setups. For the non-swap setup, like I said, if you want to do the swap setup, he does have the explanation here on how to do it. But mainly, I'm going to talk about the non-swap setup. But yeah, having Bastion of Honor is insanely strong because it just gives you a bunch of block effectiveness, makes you so tanky, makes it so you can like push monoliths with ease. The rings here just increase damage, resistance, crit avoid, pretty easy. Same thing on this ring. And of course, for the belt here, the increased damage, and of course the mana regen, health. The reason why he's running mana regen is because sometimes Channeled Flurry can suck out of your mana, so you want a little bit just to make it so you don't run out of mana sometimes. And of course, Ravenous Void for the gloves. You could either use Wing Guards, you could use Ravenous Voids, you could use HP gloves. It doesn't really matter what you use. Mainly why he's using Ravenous Voids because he has it and it's a lot of DR. But like I said, you could always just use a pair of Wing Guards for even more damage. And of course, for the boots, just the HP crit avoid, like the usual setup. Same thing with the relic. He's actually running an antidote vial for the leech rate. His poison res is also capped thanks to this, and on top of the chest. It's really nice. Damage, frailty, endurance, which is really strong. You could swap this out for a Valdir's Chalice because you have all that bleed chance, and a Valdir's will give you a bunch of sustain while doing monoliths. That is one option you can do. Even for the poison version, it's that strong because you just gain a bunch of health on kill per stack of health on per stack of bleed on the target, which means that if while you're attacking, if you apply like 20 bleeds, you get a bunch of HP back, even if your bleeds don't do that much damage, which is really, really strong. And of course, like the blessings, like this is like your stereotypical setup for this kind of build. Now, for the bleed version, the main difference is he's running a Corsair's Blood Cowl instead for the bleed effect and duration, which both stats are absolutely insane with this build. He's also running, like I said, Valdir's Chalice automatically because it is like one of the best bleed uniques in the game. And that's pretty much it for differences in terms of bleed. Like, of course, you get the bleed chance per equipped sword, the increased damage while holding a sword. It's like not that much of a difference between the bleed and the poison version. It's just preference. This does more damage. This is tankier. That's the main difference. But yeah, with that being said, have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you're at. I'll be linking this Google Doc in the description. So if you want to play the swap versions like he's playing. And with that being said, bye.